Good evening, Cherries fans. And for tonight's An Evening With, it's not a player, it's a man who's been part of the club for around 20 years. He's been part of the youth setup from the very, very beginning and has helped make it what it is today. Tonight, I'm joined by Joe Roach. Good evening, Joe, and welcome to Up the Cherries in All Departments.
Yeah, good evening, Matt.
Nice for you to join us.
No, thank you for inviting me on. It's delighted.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. Well, if we could start off with the first question, a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up and how did you get into football as a youngster?
Born in Liverpool, grew up in Anfield, probably about 500 metres from the Spine Cop. Stayed in Anfield till I was about 11, and then we moved to a place called Norris Green. So from a football point of view, it was an era where everyone played outside. Everyone was outside. You were kicked out of the house at, if it was holidays, you're out the door at 9 o'clock in the morning. You were back in at 9 o'clock at night. So spent a huge time playing football on the pitches, local pitches, fields, for want of a better word. So that's where it started. I'd be playing 20v20 maybe, or 20v16. There'd be lads of 23 playing, and I'd be like 12, 11, 7, 8, whatever it might have been. So it was all mixed up. Learned a lot of ways of navigating difficult situations physically. Obviously, I'm not a tall guy, and I wasn't then. Never played for the school. I was probably deemed too slight, maybe. But obviously played a lot with friends, and then we had when I moved to Norris Green after 11. The area where I live, we have quite a lot of prominent footballers live there. Steve Coppell live around the corner. Chris Lawley, who played with Liverpool. Jerry Byrne lived on the estate. And obviously we used to play together. They obviously moved on later in life to sort of well-known teams. So it was a very competitive area. So that's where it started. At 14, I basically left home unannounced, for want of a better word, and I moved to relatives in Cumbria. And then I started playing up there. Brought a bit of the Liverpool sort of steel, if you like, to that area. Lovely part of the world at the time, Barrow-in-Furness. And then started playing at 16 in men's football for Vickers, who were in the Northwest League. And I did quite well as a winger at the time. So that was really the roots of my introduction to football, and a little bit of how it morphed a little bit up till I was sort of 16 years of age.
Okay. Well, who were your footballing heroes as you were growing up? And
majority of them would be Liverpool players, obviously. Ian St. John, Peter Thompson, then Kenny Dalglish, Graham Souness. Phil Thompson was a real hero of mine because he was a winger as well. Then we got John Barnes, Jimmy Johnson, who played for Celtic, who was a jinky. They called him jinky. I think he was a jinky winger. I think he got sort of, I think it was in the early 2000s, Celtic's greatest ever player as it was at the time. George Best was obviously prominent at that time. So, and Alan Hansen, defensively, I thought he was a really good player on the ball. So very much centred around, Liverpool. I was very strong Liverpool support. Didn't really bother about anybody else really, other than those odd individuals I mentioned.
Yeah. Is it true that you were at Liverpool Football Club when you were younger?
No, it's not a truth. What happened was, when I was playing for Vickers, I was scoring quite a lot of goals because I used to get in behind people. I was very, very quick. I had a good delivery, good finish, and I started scoring goals. And someone came up to me after a game and sort of asked me for the details, heard my accent. So I gave him the details. And then a few weeks later, I got a letter from Tom Saunders, who is the youth development officer at Liverpool, inviting me in for a fortnight trial. What happened basically is that I just declined the offer, for want of a better word, and there's a backstory behind that. I obviously left home at 14, no qualifications. My cousin, who I stayed with, for a while, was employed at the local shipyard, Vickers Shipyard, which was quite a big industry at the time. He was a foreman, and sort of he got me through the back door as an apprentice. So when the letter come in, I sort of spoke to him and said, look, I've got this opportunity to go to Liverpool for 2 weeks. And he said, well, it's not really my call. We'll have to speak to the apprenticeship manager. So he spoke to him and he said, look, if you want to go and pursue football, then fine. He said, but we've shortcut your entry here. And I'm afraid if you decide to go, then the apprenticeship will be, null and void. I was aware of some people who'd gone to Liverpool and Everton, who were locally, who were, in my mind, probably better footballers than me, more physically, probably capable. A couple of players didn't get taken on at the time because they were not the biggest, strongest, and I was far shorter than them. So it was a decision I took at the time because of my personal situation at the time. And actually, I didn't finish the apprenticeship in the end, and I didn't go to Liverpool. So, there's an interesting what-if story behind it in both areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You said, well, if I've done my research right, you're said to have had an outstanding pedigree as a footballer. But how come you didn't play at pro level? Was it a case of choosing service over football?
I don't know who told you I had an outstanding pedigree, but did I tell you that?
It's actually I think that might have come from an article I was reading on the club website, I think.
Yeah. No, I think I was very quick. I think I had a really good delivery that was honed, playing in the street, sort of playing games a lampy, as they call it, where you'd hit the lamppost from X amount of yards away, hitting trees, wherever it might be. So I had a lot of, decent accuracy around things. I wouldn't say I was very technical. I was quite aggressive. So there were certain characteristics that got me there. I was probably too aggressive in some ways. And also sometimes I'd lose my head. So that probably wasn't as calm as maybe was needed to play and continue to play. And obviously, I'm 5'4". I say, people say I'm 5'3". So there was always a disadvantage of getting into the pro game at that time. I mean, there were, smaller players playing at the time. Steve Coppell wasn't big, Alan Ball, etc., but they were really, really gifted. And really, the scouting network work in those days was probably not what it is now. So that's a sort of, the potential, but, never sort of thought of myself as a professional football player. I just loved the game and took whatever opportunity at whatever level came.
Oh, okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in the military? I believe the British Army, Royal Engineers, is that right? Royal Physical Training Corps, which sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, I could talk about the whole program about that. To be fair, when I was in the shipyard as an apprentice, myself and about, I think it was 2 or 3 lads, we had the day off during the week, and we went for a drink in the local cafe or pub maybe. And when the pub shut at lunchtime, we sort of were going to hang around till later on in the evening. So we decided to have a bit of a laugh when we went into the Army careers office, the RAF careers office, and the Navy careers office, probably to wind the blokes up in a way. And we went in, we obviously had whatever chat it was, and we came out, then carried on in the evening. And things weren't going quite well at the time, and I was sort of sitting up. I've been sofa surfing from house to house. I was kicked out of one house and went into another one, went into a friend's house. A bit of uncertainty really about what I was going to do. I went back to Liverpool for a short period of time to work in a fabrication company, but I came back. And one day I was sat on my bed and I sort of was thinking about where I'm going to go. And then I remembered about the visits to the Army careers office. And I was quite intrigued in a way. And then I remember I had a flyer, a leaflet in my drawer. Pulled out, and the first one was the Army one. So I read it and I thought, what's the harm? So I went down to the recruitment office, went in there, and the recruitment guy sort of, said, what do you want? I said, I'd like to sort of have a chat about, what it is, what you do. Didn't have really any idea of it. I was never anywhere near the cadets or anything like that. And he said, yeah, okay, fine, give me a bit of background. So, well, I've been in Vickers Shipyard, did a bit of fabrication stuff. He said, oh, do you play sport? What sports do you play? I said, well, I've only ever played football. And cross country, because that's what you did on Friday in school. And he said, well, the engineers, Royal Engineers, they do bridge building, they do minefield clearance, demolition. The REME that do the mechanical side of it, and some of the engineering side of it. And both of them are really, really prominent football corps that they do really well every year, win the Army Cup, and that might be glove fit. So I thought, oh, right, okay. So before I know it, I'm signing on in Carlisle and swearing allegiance to the Queen. And then I go to Sutton Coldfield, which is an induction, and then ends up travelling by train down to Farnborough to join the Royal Engineers training camp at Southwood, which is no longer there. It's moved. And turns up in an army base in the back of a Land Rover. I think there's about 5 of us in it. We get out the Land Rover, and there's a big square, as I now know it. It was just a big piece of concrete as far as we were aware. And there was guys doing drill. And, we'd had our head shaven at Sutton Coldfield, and we got our kit issued there. So we jumped out the Land Rover, have to stand in line, whatever that looked like. So we didn't know what a line was. And then these guys are marching up and down, and we're sort of trying to not giggle. And one of the corporals has stopped this guy on the square, and he's got this little paste cane, a wooden cane with a metal bit in the end, and he shoved it up his nose, screaming at him. And he's pushed it that far up his nose, he's split his nose, and all the blood's running down his face. So I'm going, what have I done? Anyway, what happened, I obviously, in the engineers, did the training, but the corporal on the square who actually, had the cane up this guy's nose, actually was involved in the football team. And we obviously do physical training, do all the other training, how to clear mines and bridge building stuff, and obviously played different sports. And when I did the football, I obviously did quite well. And he went, oh, give me a bit of background. So I told him what I'd done, where I'd been, Liverpool, trial. And sort of I got away with quite a bit of training. Then I finished my training, which I think then was 20-odd weeks, I think, which was horrendous. I hated it. Someone just about older than me telling me what to do. I was making my bed, and then they were tipping it on the floor. It was horrendous. I didn't like it. And then I finished that course of training, and they wanted to keep me in England because I'd got a posting to Germany, Iserlohn. And they said, look, we want to keep it, because by then I played a game for the Army youth team and on the edge of the Army senior team. And they said, we want to keep you here. We've got 2 options. One, you go into the MT section, which is the motor transport, or you go in the gymnasium, because they were fairly static jobs and they could control those positions, if you like. So, well, not really, but I don't drive. I don't really bother about driving. And I said, but I love physical, the physical activities and sport to a degree, football as it is. And that's what you have to do. So you have to pass certain tests. So so physical tests, obviously, you have to do some basic gymnastics. I said, I've never done a forward roll, I don't think, other than jumping out of trees and things like that. And they said, you have to do a military swimming test. I said, I can't swim. I'm absolutely petrified of water. I said, so, all right. So I elected to go in the gym, think I'll be all right, thinking I might swing it or wing it, sorry. And then I had to go through some basic training. Swimming tests I still couldn't complete properly. And then I would say luck takes its part in life, I suppose. I sort of impressed a couple of people, and they said, look, we're going to give you a chance. So they sent me on the initial assistant instructor's course at the PT school. And I attended that. It was really, really hard, really hard. I think that was 12 weeks of pure physical training. There was some aptitude tests, gymnastic tests, for example, handstand, vaulting, cartwheels, backward rolls, forward rolls, 1 or 2 other bits and pieces. Not too difficult, but for me, I'd never done it before, and I got accustomed to that quite well. The swimming one was the big thing for me. But I tend to say to the players sometimes, or the staff, you only need to impress one person. And I clearly impressed the instructor of my particular group, of which there was 20 in my group. There was 5 groups in there, so 100, 100 potential ACIs, PTIs. And when we were coming to the last swimming test, which was a 50-meter swim, 2-meter tread water, you had to jump in the pool. He had his clipboard on the side of the pool, looking at everybody finishing it. And when I was struggling, I was right by the edge of the pool. I'd grab out to the side and then see if he was watching, pull my hand away. And I could tell when he knew I was struggling, he was turning his back, and I knew he wanted me to achieve. And I obviously impressed him, and I passed the course. I went from that on to the next course, which was even harder, more selective, lesser number. And then you had to go back to unit to learn, then come back on it. So in total, it was about 2 years from the assistant instructors to actually changing my cap badge, as it's called, to the Army Physical Training Corps, of which there was 6 finished. Only 6 of quite a large number finished it. And all those 6 were adapted at certain specialisms, judo, athletics. I would say me as football, if you like. By that time, I'd been playing army football and combined service football anyway. And I cap badged into the Army Physical Training Corps, of which then there was only 300 and odd worldwide, and the Army then was probably 100,000. And your job basically was go to a unit, a regiment, and train them in preparation for war, and obviously organise sports and coach sports. So for me, I was qualified in a vast number of sports, athletics, track and field, basketball, squash, boxing, judo, a gymnastics coach, having not been able to do gymnastics. I actually got an A gymnastics on my final test to transfer. I became a swimming teacher, having not been able to swim. And then I went off and, toured PT Corps in different places. My first tour in 1980 was to Northern Ireland when the Troubles were on, which was an unbelievable experience for numbers of reasons, some of them obvious, but it was the Irish people we connected with were unbelievable. And the Scots Guards I was with, who were all 6 foot plus, and I'm 5'4" Scouser. We got on like a house on fire. So that was a sort of, the Army Royal Engineers Corps, without going into too much detail, which I can, and the sports exposure, which I suppose eventually allowed me to see sport and football in a different way. The benefit of I was a basketball coach as well and organizer, so I could see that the relevance of tactics in basketball and football and invasion games. So I was able to take lots of bits and pieces away from that. And I did my coaching courses. My first coaching course was in the PT Corps process, and it was a 2-week, very intensive every day, and it just transformed my game. I never knew the defenders were the people behind me. I never knew what they did other than they defended, and I never defended. I just run forward, and it just changed my whole understanding about the defensive side of the game, and it was a great education very early on for me. But I don't want to digress too far. And then obviously I had the opportunity to serve in different places around the world and serve with some unbelievable people in unbelievable regiments and the like, and do some unbelievable things.
Wow, I mean that's really interesting. I never thought, when I was doing the research, I thought it would just be sort of the standard through the army kind of the norm, I suppose. But
no. The one thing about the PT Corps is you cannot join, unlike the RAF and the Navy. I think you cannot join straight into the PT Corps. You have to be cap badged at another corps, and then you have to then go through a process of actually being an assistant in the gym, go on the selection, go on the advanced course, go on junior probationers, then senior probationers, do lots of things like anatomy and physiology, because we train to either be adventure trainists, outward bound, remedial gymnasts, as it used to be called, which is physio, so we can be a physio, or we do the normal, PTI thing, which is out in the field, preparing people for operational stuff. So it is quite, different than people's perception.
Oh, right. Okay. Is it true that you represented some teams in Hong Kong and Germany?
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, because of my position, I was responsible for running the gymnasium, planning the program for the soldiers, and some family sort of events, if you like. So I used to do aerobics for the wives, because we were obviously detached in different places around the globe. So Hong Kong, for example. While I was there, I played for. I was training with Bulliver. Tommy Hutchinson played for them. Derek Parlane was over there, who was at Glasgow Rangers. So I played within Bulliver then, but I didn't get taken on. I then went to a club called Paps Haps, which was a newly formed club run by a couple of guys who were Irish, and it was American. Paps Haps was a drink then, or it may still be, but it was obviously well financed by that company. And then there was a captain, Dutch captain, he called himself, who was very wealthy, who basically then developed this team called Morning Star. And we played at that level. It was like the professional league out there, and sort of just underneath that. And Morning Star played against Genoa in the South China Stadium, for example. We played over there. I actually got the penalty. We drew 1-1, but the Italians are very unforgiving, if I'm honest. It was more like contact karate with a ball. But yeah, I played over there, and then went to Germany later on and played for a team just outside Dusseldorf and a team just outside Mönchengladbach. But the thing that really blew my mind away a little bit in Germany, now this is 1986, I suppose that was, is, we're back in England, the facilities were not the greatest. There's loads of artificial pitches, if you like, but in every town or village there seemed to be one of these facilities, so access was great. And the team I trained with were waiting to come on, and I'm expecting the previous team that was training there to leave all the balls for us to train with. No, they took all their stuff away, and then we had all our training kit. The equipment was there, the attention to detail, the coaching was like something I hadn't really explored before. I wanted to run forward, boot the ball forward, and they were like, no. Get me to pass it, work in triangles and build up the pitch, even as early as that. And it was like, wow. Hong Kong was a totally different story. That was quite ruthless. But, in Hong Kong then, I think some of the players out there were unbelievable. But yeah, they're the teams I play with in those two particular. And I played quite a lot of decent non-league football in this country.
You played in Europe's oldest competition, the Kentish Cup. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, it's the Combined Services, which is the best players from the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force. Really at that time, some significant players, if I can say, in the Army, Navy, and Air Force in UK. Very good players who went out to play. Guy Whittingham's and Lee Bradbury's and Mike. I can't think of the goalkeeper now. He's in Ireland now. Gone past me. But yeah, we had another lad that was going to get bought out by Borussia Dortmund, but decided to stay in the Army because he liked the Naffy, his drink. So yeah, very good side. But the Kentish Cup, that was a sort of competition, and then there was obviously other teams involved in there.
Is it true that you played against some international sides like France, Belgium, Holland?
Yeah, they were. It was France, Belgium, Holland. Sons had to do with career at Tottenham. There was so conscription there. So everyone then, whoever you were, had to go through that process. So over various stages of the competition being played, there was some significant players that played in that competition.
Michel Platini being one.
Michel Platini, Enzo Schifo. Who else was there? I'm trying to think now. Enzo Schifo, Platini. Can't think of a couple more. Maybe I can't think. Dick Naniger or something like that. I think. Yeah, there was some very, very then high profile players. I mean, Enzo Schifo, we played in the competition at Aldershot the military stadium, and he'd come off before the end, and he was then getting transported to play in the World Cup. So, but he still had, that was obviously going to be weeks and weeks later, but he had to play in that because he was, under conscription.
Is there any other superstar players you came to play against during your playing days?
Well, there was a few interesting people that, for example, in Hong Kong, in Bobby Moore was over there. He was managing a team called Easton. He wasn't playing then. He was there just one season. Tommy Hutchinson was over there playing at the time. God rest his soul. Gordon McQueen played with when I was over there. Derek Parlane, who played for Rangers. So in terms of like competition-wise out there, and I suppose without trying to think of all the different situations, I think the most prominent one was in 2009. I played for England against the rest of the world in the Help for Heroes game at Reading Majestic Stadium. And Paul Gascoigne, Des Walker, Neil Webb, Matt Wright, Chris Woods, the goalkeeper, Andy Cole, Rob Lee was playing in the England side. In fact, I came on for Des Walker, so that's my claim to fame. And yes, the rest of the world was There was Lothar Matthäus, Chris Poirier, Stefan Freund, Stefan Schwartz, or Tugay, Toto Shalasi, who was obviously, some of these guys won the World Cup Euros '96. Anders Limpar, Michael Jilks was at Reading, Ali McCoist. So yeah, we all played in that game, and the charity was close to my heart. I was an ambassador for the armed forces there and that was when I was at Bournemouth Football Club. So I was very, very proud of that. And Lee Bradbury was also an ambassador at the time. Didn't get involved in that game. I don't, for whatever reasons. I think because he was, involved in other stuff. But yeah, they're sort of the ones that stand out.
That's amazing amount of names there that you've just rolled off.
Decent crowd as well.
Yeah, definitely. What did your role as FA coach educator for the British Army? What did that?
It was actually called director of coaching. And whilst I was in the army, obviously I played football, played for the services, both at army level, combined service level, and then I started coaching them. It was basically managing the team, but you had an officer as a representative who was the manager. But I obviously picked the side and coached them, and we got them in from all over wherever the army was globally. And then I had some unbelievable coaches that coached me in the army team. One lad, Alf Coulton, went on to work for the FA. I can name others that were brilliant. And they obviously had to then prepare someone else to take over that coaching role. So I was obviously played for the army at the time. I was one of the most highly capped players at the time. And they said, right, okay, well, you get qualified. I got my full license, which is the A license now, when I was 25, I think. So I got the qualifications. So we started running courses for service people, Army, Navy, Air Force, wherever they were in the world, in Aldershot mainly. And the Football Association allowed us to provide those courses for servicemen, given the disadvantages of being in active service and being able to, get available for a course. So they all would come in and we'd run the basic, as it was then, prelim course, then the advanced course. Then there was an intermediate course, and then there was what they call the full license, which is the A license now. So I did those with some Navy coaches and some RAF coaches. And then my job then was to coach coaches, to coach the teams back in their units, back in their regiments. And then when I was getting towards the end of my army career, fortunately for me, again, a little bit of luck, the FA were changing their qualifications to UEFA. And so they run what they call a conversion course. So they converted what was the A license into the UEFA A license, or the full badge into the UEFA A. So we did the conversion course at Bristol. But I had a chance to sort I was really well supported by the major who was in charge of Army football at the time. Bless him, Terry Knight's no longer with us, fantastic guy. And I said, look, we're gonna run out of legs here, excuse the pun. Who's going to be able to then put in place these new qualifications if they're not qualified? I said, I've just now got. In fact, this is true. I was the first UEFA A coach in the country, and that was only because I was fortunate to have the flexibility to be viewed by a guy who was at the FA at the time, who subsequently went on to Tottenham, who's now at the FA, who's the technical director at the FA. And he came and did my logbook, for want of a better word, when he was available. So I got my logbook over the line very quickly. So as you probably all know the Army, but when to get yourself in front of generals and everything else like that is probably when you get in a VC or something like that. But I was able to sort of negotiate meetings with the generals involved in the Army Sports Control Board, and presented this proposal about what is going to happen if we truly want to keep our Army teams flowing, military teams flowing, and then get qualified to be able to qualify coaches to go back into their regiments to coach players. Then this is something we need to look at. And they took that on board, and I was employed as the first ever civilian director of coaching in any sport in the armed forces. And I spent sort of two and a half years in that role. And I was doing courses, wherever the Army might be, Gibraltar, Germany, Ireland. I went to Zimbabwe to take a group of 64 Zimbabwean school teachers on a coaching course, because there was an Army secondment over there who were supporting the local population. So they got me over to do that on behalf of the Zifa Football Association. So it was a fantastic time, an opportunity really to develop coaches into coaching and give my sort of insight into whatever that looked like.
Okay. How did your roles and your service within the military, how did that sort of change you as a person, and what do you take from those days that you still use in everyday life?
Well, the military, that time basically made me, I think. I'd had a sort of fairly rocky childhood. My mum was like, unbelievable. I got a lot of traits from her, respect, gratitude. We didn't have a lot, didn't have anything really. My dad was quite hard on me. He basically said when I joined the Army, I wouldn't do it, wouldn't make it. Sort of point to prove. And that's why I kept going, I think, to a degree. And I thank him. He's not with us anymore, but my mum isn't. But it made me. I was a little bit ill-disciplined. I think I was a good kid and really respectful. I always said please, thank yous. But I was a kid running on the streets like we all were at that stage of life, at that age, in that era. But coming in and sort of giving me a sense of being and sort of the camaraderie and the togetherness and the discipline for sure, the structure. I didn't know it at the time, but there was building blocks that were being made, and obviously I had loads of experiences, met some unbelievable people. I bumped into a gang of guys the other week who I hadn't seen for 30 years. It was like I'd only seen them yesterday. You never lose that bond and having that connection and respect for people and giving people opportunities and support, and at the same time being hard working, determined. In some ways it's like a young player at 16 to 18. We're trying to prepare him to be a professional football player. 16 to 18 in the Army, we're trying to prepare him for operations, for conflict, for combat. So I think there's certain traits there, because they're both difficult in different ways. Certain requirements that you need to make it, if that's the right word. I didn't join the Army till I was 19. But when I look at, in answer to your question, when I think back now, when I got the opportunity to come into Bournemouth, the one thing I didn't want to do is speak about the Army, because in 2001 I think there was still this sort of the army did things over here, and it wasn't as publicised as it was later on with Afghanistan and things like that. I was in Ireland for 18 months. My parents didn't know what was going on over there, really. The big obvious things happened, but all the little bits that happened, which were not great, were never publicised. Mobiles didn't exist. So when I come in, I thought, well, I'm a football coach and I'm coming to a football club. Clearly there was a way it worked, and I thought, right, I'm going to try and work it. I had never coached youth team players or schoolboys in my life. I'd played football, adult football. I'd had limited exposure to junior football as a player, really. And I, sort of thought, right, okay, I'm going to approach this in a way, coaching side of it. But I think with the way it was at Brockenhurst at the time, not very long into that period of time, I thought, right, how am I going to get these guys to understand what's needed, given all the variables and the things we didn't have, and the opportunities they needed. How can I change what I'm doing for them to change what they're doing, if you like? And I had, they were great guys at whatever stage. I'd go back there, Tom Morra, to that period of time. I enjoyed not having things, and I thought, right, okay, I'm going to bring more discipline in. I'm going to be more ruthless. I'm going to get them to take more responsibility. I unfortunately I let go for lying. He'd never put foot wrong, but I told everybody if there was another person who lied to me, then I don't care who you are, you'll be released, and that happened. And it wasn't a whimsical situation, but I look back now and I think, really, that was a bit tough. But I just, at the time, I thought that's what I needed, because there was a lot of things that, in that program at the time that weren't provided, and I had to keep people on track. And I thought I was too soft before, and they take liberty, or I'm over the top. I'm going to meet in the middle somewhere. So it brought a lot of, that sort of army organisation, and some of the, the activities we did weren't football related. We did basketball and handball stuff because it was the same sorts of things, and just vary the program a little bit. Because nowadays we talk about multi-skill access for young players, but really how many clubs do it, I'm not too sure. I just think there was lots to be gained from it. And also the pitches, we only had 1.5 pitches at Brocknor, so half the time they were underwater. So, we do boxing stuff, and, we do loads of challenges. And really the biggest thing, I think, was breaking them down is the wrong word, but building that resilience and robustness, because that's what they're going to need, especially in the game at that time with the limited opportunities that were in place. So a lot of the army I brought without them understanding and knowing it. And I look back now, if I'm honest, and go, maybe I lost a few players along the way, being a little bit not looking at the individual player that much. But if I'm honest, time was of the essence, and that was limited.
Yeah. Well,
And I think, the one thing at the forefront of all this was thinking about my own journey from leaving home to whatever stages there were, and going, right, I need to make not these players, I need to make these young guys think about a career. I need to prepare them beyond playing football, however long that might be, because it could be 5 minutes, it could be 5 years, it could be 15 years. I need to make them totally focus on the timekeeping, the respect, the hard work, the camaraderie. And the most pleasing thing for me now is when I bump into some of the players, quite a lot of the players from a long time ago, that's what strikes me about them. Forget, what they've done play-wise. When I speak to them and talk to them, and, it's more fulfilling in many ways for some of the guys who haven't made it and have done really well outside of professional football. That is also, for me, success.
Yes, that's nice to hear that. Joining AFC Bournemouth, if we can touch on that. Sean O'Driscoll, who was the previous youth team manager, he had recently succeeded Mel Machin as first team manager. What was the School of Excellence and the youth team system operating like when you joined?
If you don't mind, I'll just share a bit of a story before that.
Yeah,
to
definitely.
how I got here. So I ended up going to work for Newport Football Club coaching with a guy called Tony Mount, who was the manager, who was Mason Mount's dad. And we started running a college education program. At the same time, I was still doing courses. I was doing coaching course at Hampshire FA, and I run a course in Marchwood, which was an army establishment. So I was able to get in there and use their facilities. And unbeknown to me, well, I knew who they were, but there was a guy on there that was a Bournemouth Football Club. He worked at the community scheme at the time, Wayne Smith, and whatever the size of the community scheme was, which was nowhere near what it is now. And going back to the point I make about you only need to sort of connect with one person. When he came back from the course, I'm led to believe Sean spoke to him and said, how did it go? And he said, he explained what had gone on. I think he spoke quite well about the course and about me and about what I was doing, because obviously I introduced myself to the course. And at the time, the youth team had been removed for financial reasons, so there was no youth team. And then Sean got hold of me, he said, would you like to come in and have a chat? So I said, well, yeah, okay, fine. And at that time, I really wanted to try and get back into, obviously I was at Newport Football Club, so clearly I wanted to get involved in coaching again. I'd moved away from the Army director's job, and I had aspirations and of being involved in coaching players. So he asked me to come in. The ground had been knocked down. He wasn't actually there at the time. He'd gone to look at a couple of players, so he left his receptionist to apologise. And then we met him again later. And he just explained about what he wanted to do. He said, look, I've heard you're doing this program. He said, we removed the youth team for these reasons. We haven't got any money. Can you give us an idea of, anything you can do, given what you've done at Newport? And so, yeah, I could certainly have a think about it. And then I explained what I was doing. I actually went to Bournemouth and Poole College, and I went to Brocknor College. There was advantages at Brocknor and not advantages at Bournemouth and Poole, because Brocknor was on a rail link and they had their pitches on site. I had a chat with a guy there, Neil Flanagan, who was absolutely brilliant. I can talk a bit about that more later, but back to the point you make. Centre of Excellence was, a very different beast than it is now. We had, I think there was about 4 or 5 venues. You had people scattering all over the place to do coaching sessions, and we'd end up being kicked out of a coaching session because we couldn't pay for the facility, and then suddenly trying to tell the parents, and then we'd have to try and get them to realise where they had to go next, and that's the sort of way it was. And that was nothing down to any individuals. It was just the way it was operating. Low budget. I think the budget then was probably something like 80k for the year. So I was imagine what people have been paid, and the guys that were involved at that time, were so dedicated to, trying to support the players, but it is what it was. So the Centre of Excellence was sort of that operation. And I say that the youth team wasn't in existence. I had to coax back a lot of the players who'd just been released in the youth team. And I remember sitting outside Dean Court on the grass at Kings Park with these parents and players saying, like, once I'd secured Brocknor, this is the vision, and they were like, oh, we've heard this before type thing. And I said, look, this is where we want to go. So I did a coaching session and said, look at what we're doing. And got a couple of guys down to help me. And I think they quite liked and bought into what I was saying. But that's sort of the way the organisation was at the time. And then I had to look at how I was going to then move that forward.
So when you first started, I believe, if my research is right, you had 5 jobs really. Head of youth team manager, education officer, recruitment, and Centre of Excellence manager. Is that right? How did you balance all that?
Well, there was. I was also the community officer, but the community officer was linked with the education side of it. To be fair, so it was the same sort of thing. So how did I manage that? Well, the interesting thing was Sean managed to sweet talk me into coming here with his vision. He was so passionate, and as I say, going back to what I said before, I said okay, fine, and I'd arranged to start in whatever, I think it was the July or the June, and Andrew Dawson was the CEO at the time who sent me the contract, so it was no brainer. The money wasn't anywhere near brilliant. I wasn't bothered about that, and I thought, right, how am I going to work this out? And basically, Sean said, "This is the areas." It's actually, I've got the job description, I've got the contract with all those jobs on it. So it wasn't sort of like, this is your job, but by the way, you've got to do all these things in the job description. It was actually on the contract. You are blah 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 blah. I'm going, right, okay. So where do I start with this? And then when I turned up, like I say, there was no ground. It was getting knocked down.
Yeah.
I'm in a porter cabin. I'm going, and I've got like no U team, and we're operating out of 5 venues sometimes, or maybe 3 if 2 haven't been closed down. Other staff that were at the time were worried about obviously what I was going to be like when I came in. So there's that little bit of element. So I got all the staff together. And then I thought, right, okay. What I did do is I dipped back into my military background, and I was never really, I left school at 14, didn't have any qualifications, and I wasn't well versed in maths and things like this. So I wasn't thick, but I thought maths and budgets don't appease me, don't please me at all. So there was a guy who was my coach, believe it or not, when I was playing in the army. He was in the Army Pay Corps. He was a qualified coach. He's an A licensed coach as well. Derek Old, he lived local. So I asked him would he come in and be the Centre of Excellence manager, and he bit my hand off. So he took responsibility for the Centre of Excellence. I retained the other jobs, and then Wayne Smith and his brother Danny Smith were great in the community scheme. They had some sort of part-time volunteer people doing the community program, because obviously we were getting some players from that environment. And then I think I'm right at the time, the community changed to sort of become a trust, I think. So there was more opportunities for them to develop and keep their own budgets flowing. So I thought, right, so I did some interviews for the community officer, had some applicants come in, some good guys, a couple of guys I thought, I'm not too sure whether you're going to invest in the community scheme. I think you just want to come into a professional club. So I had to weigh that up. And then I had the opportunity when I played a game at the 18s, when the program got running, that I'd already bumped into a guy called Steve Cuss, who was at Torquay. So Steve come in, we had an interview, met with Sean, because one thing, Sean was really interested in what was going on. And obviously we gave Steve the job, him at Wayne and Dan and all that, and the rest is history. At the community scheme, he's done unbelievably well with his team, and obviously with the ladies section and girls section and everything else now, and all the other things he does. So, I'm really pleased to have been able to support the community scheme and place Steve in at that time. And, he's totally focused on that environment and does a terrific job. And as I say, kept the head of youth, kept the youth team role, and sort of that sort of, give me relinquished a few responsibilities. I mean, that obviously didn't all happen in 5 minutes. So,
No.
yeah. But yeah, I had to make sure I tried to do it right. And I say I had some great people still working there who were working there before, who helped me. I had Pauline Dighton, who was a part-time secretary, who was fantastic. She and another lady who worked with her, Sophia Bashi, who worked with her in there, and they were great because they were sort of support me. I think they were a bit concerned that a bloke from the army was going to come in, but we got on really well. And Pauline knew everything about everything, rules, and she did part-time. The work she did was unbelievable. So I had a really good, strong support mechanism in her and Sophie. Yeah.
So during those early days, did you have any voluntary help on a regular basis?
From staff wise?
From anybody?
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. We had again, because of the budget and trying to develop it, and trying to give people opportunity. I think people were quite keen to get involved in pro football at a level, or certainly Centre of Excellence as it was. Yeah, we had nearly all the scouts as they were volunteers. But we were very, very locally based. So we weren't expecting to travel all over the place. So it was very limited. Sort of a strategy type of thing where we would go. We got some coaches coming in, young coaches. Sort of. Would come in and say, send a CV, and I say, okay, fine. There's an opportunity. I mean, I always, when I talk to people now, like even some of the young players who leave us, who want to get involved in coaching, I say, look, a volunteer, because everyone likes a freebie without being crass. And if you go in and you present yourself in the right way, you never know. And I've got a story around that, which we can maybe talk about later. But be humble and grasp the opportunity, because whatever happens with it, you'll learn something, and hopefully it goes away. Or then we can have a look at how you apply yourself, and then we can start thinking, okay, we'll start trying to generate some income. So yeah, we had volunteers in doing different stuff at different times.
We've briefly touched on it, but how important was Brocknor College back in those early days?
It'd be easy to say if we'd have gone to another, it'd have been. If I'm honest, I think just the people there, the principal, the vice principal, Neil Flanagan, were major investors in trying to get the program going. They obviously wanted the from an educational point of view, they wanted the kudos of having an attachment to a professional club. For an Ofsted come in and what's the varied programs you're doing and everything else. But location wise, as I say, it was on the train line. None of the players got paid. So how are we going to recruit players? We don't provide transport. We haven't got minibus drivers. We haven't got a minibus, for want of a better word. So the train line from Weymouth all the way through to Brockenhurst, or from London down to Brockenhurst, if anyone was along those lines, they could get into Brockenhurst station and they walk straight out. They had sports fields, which we were needed to have on site ideally. Although the groundsman only attended them probably once every 3 weeks, because it was council groundsman. So you imagine what the state of them was if it had been raining. But it was great because it was what it was. And in some way, the benefit of it was that Neil was quite open at the start and said, look, we need attainment to run this program, because I then at the time we had an under 17s and an under 19s. That's the way the league was run. So of course I can't run everything. So I'm doing the under 19. Who's going to do the 18 and who's going to assist in between one of those two? So I said, look, I haven't got any staff, and the club, weren't going to employ anybody else. So I had to be a bit creative in the conversation. So the college employed 2 part-time coaches. I say part-time in the sense of the time, but the quality they brought to the table. Mark Kelly, who played for Ireland, played for Portsmouth. He came in with me. No airs and graces. Huey Lewis, who was a Portsmouth-based guy, who was a great character, came in. Jordan Mooney at the time come in to do some part-time physio and some sort of sports science. I could do a lot of the physical because my Army Physical Training Corps days. And then we had Kev Berry come in. So the program morphed in terms of, when Mark and Huey moved on. We had a guy called Brian O'Donnell, who sadly passed away not long ago, played for Bournemouth. Unbelievable guy. Great character. Did the 16s, coming with me. Marcus Brown and come in. Then Kev Berry come in to do sports science. I had a guy called Tom Bates come in as an intern university student, who's now been with the under 21 England side in the psychology. He's done the Olympics. He's to see his growth is unbelievable. He was at Birmingham Villa. Other people, Demir Vavan, come in doing psych. So as all these people were able to come in and develop themselves in terms of staff roles and that, and the club didn't pay for any of that. The only wage they paid was mine, and we were, then the education becomes so important, and that's why I probably spent so much time focused on attainment and making sure, even today, that the guys follow up on the education. I try to suggest to the staff they need to look at the players when they're in those environments, because you learn so much more about them from when they're not on the training ground or not playing a game. How they interact with people and how they communicate and everything else. So it was a great base to learn from for the players' point of view, the staff point of view, a bit of insight into them. And then over time, the college were able to access the ACE program, which generated a little bit of income. So then the players were paid, I think, £30 a week. And we were able to, from the college, get some travel allowance. So if the lads who then, with the 19s age groups, wanted to get a car, if it was a car or a motorbike, they're able to sort of pay for that, or they could get. We were able to get rail passes. So I could have given up very early on because it was really difficult, but enjoyable in equal measures. And then things morphed, and we're still being tutored by Brocknor College today. Up until 2011, the players were they were at Brocknor College. Very few of them, if any, were in accommodation. We had a lad, Curtis Allen from Ireland, who was supposed to be the next George Best, play for Ireland. He'd come home, we'd able to get him accommodation. Danny Ings went in accommodation. We got a bursary from him for Hampshire FA. So the college, when you say the value of it, it's like it got us on a platform. It got us a base, and we grew with it. And the college has changed. The personnel, Neil's gone, but consistently they've supported us over the years. And whenever I have a conversation with them, if you hadn't mentioned it, they would come into the conversation. They've been such a pivotal part of what we've done. And when I think of the finance that they've attached to it, and okay, it's indirect from the government and everything else, but you look at the finance that people put into the college and into us and supported it. And we had the use of the gym, obviously the classrooms, but we had the restaurant area, the cafe. Everything was on site. It was we used the sports hall when we could, and then we couldn't use the sports hall, and sometimes we couldn't use the gym. And the only downside was we couldn't train in the afternoons, so we missed a lot of training time because the pitches needed to rest, and there was obviously college teams that needed to come onto it. So the program was quite limited. So I had to try and get as much in as I could, and sometimes the part-time staff couldn't come in. So sometimes it'd be me with 25 people, maybe more sometimes. But then, you just get on with it. Limited kit, if any. It was, like I say, it was, you can tell probably by the way I'm talking, it was just an unbelievable education for me, and an opportunity that, I can look back on fondly and go, it probably got us where we are.
Absolutely. I mean, it's with things like you just mentioned there, with like lack of kit. Did the fundraiser Cherry Share contribute to the youth team in any way?
Oh yeah. I mean, I can't. Paul Franks.
Yeah.
Paul Franks and some others. I mean, from the buckets to the table outside, what now is the shop, for the raffle tickets, for the scratch cards, for the quiz sheets, Cherry quiz, whatever it was. Get a phone call, Joe, what do you need? And I'm like feeling guilty. I'm going, well, could I get some balls? I mean, we had 17s and 19s, two teams, and I think if we were lucky, we might have had 12 balls for each group. Cones were getting broken. We had no money, no budget to really replace to a degree. So yeah, could I have, trying to be humble, can I have 20 balls? Anything else? Well, is that all right? Yeah. We've got this money. Do you need any cones? So, updates is when you want something else. And then, it was like, we got some money for a minibus. Your minibus was a bit ragged. I went, oh, so we got a minibus from Red Kite. I think it was, big red bus with a Bournemouth badge on the side. I think, wow, where are we now? It failed its MOT about 5 times, but I think it might not even had an MOT. I think I was driving to Exeter and the wheels like this. But yeah, they were, and you know what, for me, and look, I know you're looking behind you, you're just, diehard fan of the club, and there's going to be 1 or 2 people watching this, maybe who are fans, but just that from that process, if that's the right word, the connection with the fans, and me understanding the importance of the fan base and the desire of the fans to try and support, a little youth team as much as the first team. And I was just awestruck about how much people were prepared to do. I wasn't here in the days of, when they were on, was it the pavilion they were in?
Oh, Winter Gardens, yeah.
I think Winter Garden. I wasn't here then. So if someone read it, they go, oh, it's a load of fans, wanting to do this. And it's sort of a news thing and it goes. But when you see that depth of desire, commitment, and it was unbelievable. It was brilliant. And I know anyone watching this, that I'm sure there's lots who put their hand in the pocket then, I can't thank you enough, because as little or as much, that you turn up on a training day and you open a box of footballs, that the youth team players were like, oh wow, little stuff meant so much because we had nothing really.
Yeah. How different things are now, which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later. But
Oh, yeah.
um, well, is there any players who were involved in any of the youth setups that you've had over the years that didn't really progress on in their career, but should have made a career out of the game?
Do you know what? This is an interesting question because, and it's a good question, is that I suppose sometimes I feel guilty about talking about the past because you talk about things that you did and therefore, and obviously I'm of an age now where, there's a lot of younger people involved in the game and you're trying to make a statement about, well, yeah, well, we did this, but, obviously now you know what the academies are like now, probably, the amount of staff and the finance and the facilities and you've got the under-21 squads now. I mean, the biggest problem we had in sort of centre of excellence football at youth level at that time, because the other thing about Brocknor, we weren't allowed to sign any player on a youth contract at Brocknor because we come out of the youth programme. The Football League wouldn't allow us to re-sign as youth players, so we had to sign as extended players, extended schoolboys. So what happens there is in the publications for the amount of players who played in the first team at this stage, we wouldn't have got a lot of the players on that paperwork. So, for example, I think Brett doesn't register or wouldn't do. So we signed them to that sort of process. And then the 17s and 19s, I thought, great, because we had a 3-year education program, 3-year development program, 3-year training programs, whatever. So the opportunity was elongated. And then for some reason, the league had a meeting, asked for people like myself to put in what we felt, because they were talking about reducing it to under 18s. Anyone with a football brain in our job, youth development, would go, why would you take a year away? At that time, there was no 21 football. There was reserve team football. That was that. But some of the players weren't prepared for that, weren't ready for that. And they went down to 18. I think a lot of it was about the finance that was associated with running 2 teams in youth clubs, because obviously, football league clubs are not well, stocked with money. So I think it was a case of that, which was a little bit, I think, narrow-minded, if I'm honest. I don't mean to upset anybody, but so the reason for that backstory is that we lost a year. And of course, we had players who played in the first team, 1 game, or were on the bench, or played reserve team football. And if we'd have had the under 21s as it is then, I believe we would have had more people come through the system. I think some of the ex-players that are working with us now remember some of the younger players coming in. They go, well, he wasn't this. But if you look at the training time we had with them, which was limited, because you could only train so many mornings at Brock, couldn't train in the afternoons. Everything else, you think, what? It was more about the attitude, the mentality, determination, and all those things really with the players that I was looking at and thinking, there's players here who could do it. We had players who played for the first team and then, played 1 game and then, didn't play again. But, they did, in my opinion, did very well. The answer to the question I haven't probably answered is that there was lots of players who could have played and didn't. But there's lots of players now that we as youth developers would think, well, why wouldn't he play? And football's full of opinion at the end of the day. So my opinion may not be the same opinion as someone else who's picking the team. So that's just the way it is. But I believe firmly that there could have been more players progress. But some of those players have had a fantastic career in non-league.
Yeah.
And obviously forged a different career. And they're the people I spoke about now that I'm really proud of.
Yeah, okay, that's great. You also took the reserves during your time at Dean Court. Did you find this valuable to be able to blend certain youth team players in with first team players?
Oh, yeah. I mean, what I didn't do before, apologies, I sort of lost track of it. You're talking about when Sean and Peter Grant were in.
Yeah.
I jumped over that and talked about how I got in there, which was disrespectful to those 2 guys. They were, for me, brilliant. not played professional football. I played decent non-league football. I've come in to sort things out, and I've immediately, okay, the staff levels weren't big. We didn't share an office, so it'd been easy for them to sort of, but I was included and felt included in everything from day one. Pete was a great character. Sean was really deep. I've got huge respect for those two guys, and obviously Richard Kelly come in just after. So I gained a lot of knowledge and understanding from both of them. Going to the point about the reserve team, I think it was a great opportunity because there was, like I said, there was a time when the 19 age group was moved. A lot of the reserve teams who played were more stocked with first team players than we were. So a lot of the youth team players, like Danny Ings played reserve team football at 16, and there've been lots of others. But as an example, so he learned very quickly about senior football, men's football, if you like. I'll give an example. So we played Swansea once, and we got absolutely battered, 10. I think it was 10-0, and they had some really Lee Trundle played and others. And I'm thinking, oh my word! And we had the opportunity to play them again the way the fixtures were, probably about 3 weeks later, and we used that game as an example of this is what first team players. And we drew the game 1-1. It was in Wales, and it was sort of the same group of players, but for them to gain the knowledge and the understanding and the access to that game at reserve team level, give them the opportunity to understand what first team football looks like. Because you're playing your team football, that doesn't always happen. So I think it was a great bridge for them to be able to step into to play. And I say sometimes that the whole youth team, reserve team, was youth team, and so the level went up, considerably. And I suppose that's why quite a few of the players who did play in the first team understood a lot more about it in that regard. And obviously, I had a lot of insight into what Sean and Peter and latterly Richard wanted, so I was able to communicate those things succinctly across the table, and I think the players would see me connected with those two guys and go, oh, right, this guy's involved in what's going on. So there's a little bit more, I'm not saying but they needed buy-in, but a little more belief in me when I was describing stuff and talking about that. I knew what I was talking about based on my interactions with the manager and the assistant manager.
Okay. The club, then and now, has always been known to bring good footballers through the youth system and into the first team. For example, Sean would have helped produce names like Eddie Howe, James Hayter, Carl Broadhurst, Carl Fletcher, just to name a couple. Did you feel any pressure to keep that trend going? Because at the time, some of those players, for example, like Eddie Howe and Carl Fletcher, were sold on for some big sums of money that sort of kept the club going at the time.
Pressure, personal pressure from a coaching point of view, because obviously coaches want to show they can coach and they want the outcome to be, I'm going to be competitive, I'm going to try and win a game and whatever else. We didn't always. I never felt anyone over my shoulder, judging what was going on. I didn't feel it was they were judging the players. I think Sean and Peter were very, very, very realistic, because I used to ask about what my targets are and everything else. And, I can't speak for him, but I think he would say that, what is the, I think we were having a chat the other day, is what's the reason for an academy? There's people's different ideas about what it is, but, it's providing an opportunity for people. And if that opportunity is about them developing a career outside of football, the opportunity has been achieved. If it's about being successful as a player, it's been achieved. But we were very realistic about this is what we've got. I didn't feel that I had to produce this numbers of players. And, to be fair, in equal measure, there'd be some players I'd put across the table and he would say quite openly, right, yeah, but will he play in the first team this week? And because of the budget, the club budget, we couldn't pay anybody extra. So sadly, we weren't even able to take some players on, even if we wanted to. There was no vehicle. So that was the sort of the stringency of it at the time, and the difficulties around it. But then at the same time, the opportunity to progress and not worry too much about, the sort of the safety of the job or whatever else, if that was the case. But no, there was no expectations in that term. He just wanted the thing to grow and just provide an environment for these players to have access to.
Okay. You would be seen on a match day on the first team bench alongside Sean and Peter and later Richard. How did that help you develop as a coach, being in and around the first team on match days?
Probably one of the best. I thought by that time, director of coaching, played football, done this. I knew things. I knew how to coach and all that. And there was so many different things that were opened my eyes to the way Sean and Peter and Richard approached the game and the players and the people, as we call them, the players. And it just really started to make me think a little bit deeper about stuff, little subtle things. Giving people responsibility in the game, and the play. You'll know better than I do that we had, like, one stage we had a really youngish first team, and the ability for those players to take responsibility on the pitch, and they'd flip a formation. At the time, the players probably used to moan about, he spends that much time, too much time looking at the opposition. But I think he wanted them to realise the opposition, to make sure they looked at what the opposition were doing, to have the ability then to change, to match what the opposition were doing, as opposed to, this is what we're doing, this is what we're going to do, and then suddenly the opposition, and then they don't know what they're doing. So they're caught in that catch-22. And the sharing of information, the openness. We had meetings every Friday, little group of us, Sean, Peter or Richard at the time, Mike Corduroy, who was recruitment, and Mark McAdam, who was the press person at the time, me, Bernie Morton, bless him, who was the kit man. And we used to meet all the time, and Sean would do the minutes of the meeting. And then the next week we'd go in the meeting and he'd go right through the minutes again. Has this been done? Has that been done? I'm going, wow. Attention to detail in a different way, in a different era. And I was enamored by them as well, because, like, Sean used to walk around the stadium on a match night or else, and make sure the lights are turned off, save the electricity, because there was, it's little things like you're thinking, and they both, all three, whenever either Richard would turn up to Centre of Excellence games on a Sunday, win, rain or shine, and so I knew he understood what was going on. He'd obviously done the youth team himself. Pete was, really invested in it, really good guy, and the whole place was just, for what we had at the time, it was so vibrant, and I learned so much about them. And in terms of being on the bench and all that, I think it just gave me an opportunity to see how that was applied without being he used to get me to do sessions, warm-up sessions, and he used to love me doing little army relay stuff, because he used to like that competitive stuff with a bit of laugh at the beginning. So I used to do some relays you're not allowed to do anymore. And it was great because I was involved, and I thought, what was going on here? I can't believe it. This is like brilliant. And then I'd be on the bench. I'd listen to them talk, and I'd be doing my own little analysis, seeing, the old tally chart in a book. And I just got so much insight listening to them talk. And I think the level of respect that they show me, I will never. No, I was with Sean today having a cup of tea. I still keep in touch with Pete and Richard. Not so much Richard now, but I certainly have kept in touch with them. Great guys. And Sean's a really, really interesting character to this day. I love having a conversation with him. Challenging, deep, thoughtful, respectful. Some people find it difficult to have a conversation with. Sometimes I love it. I come away every time going, I'm 60. I'm 67. I'm going, all right, yeah. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Well, big moment for Sean. 2003 playoff final. You were on the bench that day as well.
Yeah.
What was the memories of that day and that season for you?
Well, I knew I couldn't stay if whatever happened at the end of it. I drove there because I was coming from Wiltshire, so it was easier for me to go that way and come all the way down here. So I knew whatever happened, I'd have to be driving back. So I thought, right, okay, didn't think too much about that. Then we stayed in the hotel. We had training sessions on. I think we were on a rugby pitch. I think it was, doing the pre-match training stuff at the hotel, doing some stuff. And I think one of the most, I've got to get this right, I think. So I don't think if you remember not, but Warren Cummins had an injury. and I think myself and Bernie had to sort of get him back to the physio, to then assess him to get him back into the hotel to then be ready for the game. That's one thing I always remember. Going into the stadium at that time, the size of it, I don't know. What, a lot of it just went over my head. It's just sort of, this is like a final. I'd been in finals at lower level stuff and that before, but this is the first time I've been involved in the organisation in a game of that level, and they did. And it's got, it's from behind the bench, and it's in my study upstairs, and I'm looking, and I'm still there, and not all the time, but when I go in that room, I always look at it. It's been signed by all the players, and I look and I think, I'm stood there in that game, in that stadium, on that occasion, with those fans, with the results, with the performance, and I was part of it. It's one of those things, a young footballer, coach, wherever else, would just dream of. Certainly from my point of view, not being in the game at that level. And, I've been at Coventry for a little bit, and I've been at West Brom a little bit in pro football, which we didn't talk about. But, that was just, when you said it there, I'm just trying to reminisce of it. It's just like gone. I remember the goal. I remember the goals, the euphoria. Yeah. And I still remember, the calmness from Sean and Peter going mad. So, sorry, Richard. Sorry, wasn't it Richard?
I think it was Peter Grant at the time.
No, it was Peter. Sorry, yeah, Peter. Sorry, just
yeah. No, it was been Peter Grant.
No, I can't. They're the sort of, and then they all, celebrated on the way back, and I went home. So it's a big celebration. I think they stopped on the services all the way back down, I think.
Great times, I must admit.
Yeah.
You've seen over the development of a whole host of names that have broke into the Cherries first teams. Just to name a couple: Brett Pittman, obviously, goal scoring sensation; Sam Vokes, Danny Ings. How do you know when a player is ready to make that step into the first team?
How did I know? I didn't. People have asked me these questions about, did you think this? And I could stand on a soapbox and say, yeah, I thought this and I thought that. Sam Vokes for one. The opportunity he had, we had two strikers. Spoke about this before. We had two strikers. Kevin Bond was a manager. We didn't have anyone. We had the embargo thing, I think, whatever it was, and we were trying to get a striker and couldn't. And I had these two guys, and I feel for the other one who remained nameless, but Sam had this calmness about him, and I thought the occasion, the Wolves game, his character, I think he'd deal with it better. He went on, and I think I've spoke this before. He wore rubber studs and was slipping. I thought, oh my word. But if I'm honest, if someone had spoke to me at that time, just before that game, where do you think Sam will play? I'd have probably said I think he'll play conference level football, national level football, given where we were at the time. And as you'll know, it's documented about opportunity, timing. Those things are key. The opportunity for Sam, the timing of it, and how he applied himself. Danny Ings is a different story. He was not going to get anything. He was going to get released. He had the injuries. I sort of, Eddie hadn't seen a lot of him really. And we sat in the office to look, we've got to give him something. And to be fair to Eddie, we gave him 3 months, went to Dorchester, rest is history. The abiding memory of them all, Brett and Joe Partington, Josh McCoy, and I can go on and on and on and on, is the sort of what's the word I would say? Just the way they apply themselves, and the sort of the focus and determination and sort of dealing with situations. Like I said, goes back to the point I made before, when the demands and everything else, putting them in the hard times, how did they bounce back from it? Did they give up, making things difficult, taking things away, punishments, whatever? We couldn't fine him for money then, obviously, but different strategies. How do you react? How do you react? So, of course, if something goes wrong and they make that debut, for example, how will they react? Can they recover? And that might not sound like all the fluffy stuff you'd expect me to say about, technically brilliant this and all that. They were all very focused and and determined. And look, and they had all their own individual characters, and Danny Ings was a right character in many ways. But all of them, I can look back and go, all great guys, really respectful. Be respectful around people. You can see the way they engage with some of the first team players. The first team players would want to help them, instead of some snotty-nosed young player who thinks he's having it. That for me, away from all the other stuff about why he was technically brilliant and that, they had their football attributes for sure. They all still need to develop as players, but opportunity time and they took those both and grabbed them. Brett was different. He was smashing in goals, 40 odd goals a season in the youth team, and previous to that in Jersey. And people say to me, "Oh, how do you coach Brett?" I went, "I never. How can you coach someone to score a 30-yard, an overhead kick, a volley, a tap in? I touched on things, set practices up, and showed him how good I was as well." And but he was like, the only thing with him really was just getting his mind around that day-to-day routine. He was a different character in a different way, but a great guy. And how can you not take somebody who's putting 40 goals a season in the back of the net at youth team level and continuing to do that when he plays the reserves? And then you go, right, I remember Sean watching him, I think it was against Exeter, when I first spoke to him about this. Look, you got to come and watch this guy. And he come in, I think he scored, this I'm alluding to before, he scored a 30-yarder. I think he scored a volley and he did a tap-in. And Sean's like, wow. Not all the other stuff, whether he run back hard enough or whether, the goals of that area, would you want him running back over the halfway line? I don't think so. He can be close to the goal as you can get. And it's by the way, it wasn't slow. I remember a first team game, I can remember it, but can't name the team, where he went from just inside his own half and he was like, and I think a few people stood up and went, oh, because his name was Chicken, because of his running profile.
Yeah.
But he wasn't slow. Yeah, I'm eulogising over a lot of players, and I can name a lot more. But so I'd never be clever and go, I think, put him in there, he'll do this. I could say that with players who've not gone in there and they've not been able to do this because the opportunity's not been there.
Mm-hmm. To switch it slightly differently, was there ever a youngster who you were monitoring or who might have been training with the youth team that got away and had a great career in the game?
Looking back from my time, well, in a different way. Trying to think now. Name's gone. Oh, I had to drive him to Shrewsbury. Oh, striker. Oh, can't think now. But he was with us anyway, and he played. He was around the first team at 16. How bad's that? Oh, I'll come back to me in a minute. And he's continuing the game, but he went to. It's a different story. He decided not to join. He'd come out the schoolboy program, and his dad took him to Portsmouth, who were then an academy. We were a centre of excellence. Jaden Stockley. Yeah, and he realised the level at Portsmouth, and then he decided he wanted to come back with us. I took him back in with both hands. He's a physical specimen, and obviously he's gone on and done it. But he was the one who went away and then came back. We've had Jordan Rose left us, went to Stockport. They're in the league, then come back out of it. But no one I can put my finger on. Go, they've left us and come back to, sort of people to question what we've done. I can't think of. Someone might mention someone later, but not. I haven't reeled in shock and gone, oh yeah, so and so.
Yeah. Okay. Going back to Danny Ings slightly. How proud were you to see Danny and Bailey Cargill make their Premier League debuts and their international debuts, knowing that you've played a part in their development?
I'm glad you said played a part, because there's lots of people who are involved in the process, and I think the whole academy or centre of excellence, whatever stage you might have been, would take look at that and go, wow, it's all worth it. One player playing at that level makes all the hard work for them as players and for us as staff worthwhile. So it's I think Sam Boakes is the other, when he scored in the Euros. My patio's doors were open, thankfully, and as soon as he scored, I was out in the back garden running around doing a lap around the garden, because it was like, wow. And then obviously for me, Danny played for Liverpool, so that was like, wow, unbelievable. And and people up there speak very highly of him, and still do at West Ham now. Great guy. Bailey, did really well. 15, 16, he was in and around me. Unfortunately, he didn't spend enough time with me at the time, because there's another situation that was on where he got pulled back into centre of excellence, which is a bit narrow-minded. So I was really pleased, because he could have gone the other way. He's done really well. He's had some decent loan opportunities. He's had some really difficult moments as well. Some of those places with managers, but he's still in the game, which is great.
Yeah, it's nice so that they're all still involved in the game now. It's there's been obviously a lot of local players that we've touched on, brought through the system, but there's been players.
Sorry, apologies. Sorry, the one going back when you talk about the personalities of people. Going back to Danny was England thing. I was in St George's Park when the age group team that Danny was in at the time, on 21s, was training, and it was a coaching seminar. And part of the break, we were allowed to go around and watch the England team training. So I'm stood alongside, big clubs, and all the players that were in those England side. The majority of their staff were in this group here, and they had a break. The team had a break to have a bit of water, and Danny was the only player that took the time to run all the way across from the other side of the pitch to come over and shake my hand. And that for me said a lot of things about him and his development and his personality and everything else. A lot of things. And there's a couple of guys went, oh wow, because they didn't really associate me with him from being a U-team player.
Right.
He said that was quite nice. I think one or two of them had the hump, because I think they had a player there who didn't bother. But it just meant a lot, not for me, but for him to take the time to do it in that situation.
Shows a lot of respect.
Yeah.
So like with the local players obviously coming through, there's been players sourced from other parts of the country and other clubs over the years. I mean, for example, recently, Jaden Anthony, Jordan Zamora, Mark Travers, Gavin Kilkenny. How pleasing is it to see these lads develop, and like with Jordan, he's moved on, and knowing that you've played a little part in their career?
The biggest plus obviously Mark and Gavin came from Ireland, so they hadn't really come into the academy system. So brilliant for them, two guys who had the opportunity. Really good characters as well, I must say. So they had no real exposure to that academy development, if you like, and understanding. So really respectful. Families are fantastic. And I think that the guys like Jaden, Jordan, and others that are with us that have come from other clubs, I think, the drop-off in football is quite large. And I think when players are released at 16, it's really difficult to get back in. And I think to see those guys, bounce back, if you like, says a lot about them and says a lot about the academy in terms of, the player, the staff, but also the family, the buy-in, because when they come and train with us on trial, as they do, I think what they see, how the staff apply themselves and how they see the place and the discussions we have with the family, or maybe if there is an agent there, which I didn't have in place before, didn't want the agent in those particular situations. The conversations you have and the education program that gets presented, we've got a good opportunity to sell ourselves because they could go somewhere else. They're going to come from Arsenal to a Cat 3 little old Bournemouth. And I think because of their success, now agents are more prominent, then more agents want to come and attach themselves to us because they see the pathway for those players that have come in and got released. Nathan Mariah-Walsh got released by 3 clubs before he come to us. And I think he lost a lot of trust in what people were telling him, coaches and staff, because he'd heard that story before. So it's a good news story in that regard.
Okay. The club is obviously known for welcoming former players back into coaching roles. For example, Sean Cooper, Tommy Elflick, they're now part of the first team setup. Alan Connell, Andrew Sermon. I believe Juan Cummins is still coaching at some level. Is he?
He's not. No, he's left us now.
He's left now. How highly do you rate these guys that are still associated with the coaching setup?
For me personally, obviously not Tommy so much because, and not Andrew so much because he come in latterly, but Sean, Alan, Gaz Stewart, Mark Mosley, for example.
Yeah.
There was a reason for getting those ex-players in, because there was a little bit more of a buy-in from the club, but it was them also appreciating the job. It's not an easy job. You're in every day, you're working every day. They're not like as an ex-player where they're finishing at lunchtime or just after, and then they got to do all the player information stuff they have to do after training, the session preparation, the weekend work, the nighttime work training, to try and get people to come in and do that who've been a professional football player. And the relative money at the time, because obviously Sean and Alan that come in part-time initially, as Gareth did, and Mark. You think, well, how will they approach it? What will they be like? But what I've got to say is those players, those ex-players I mentioned earlier, minus Tommy and Andrew, is I spent a bit of time listening. I may have spent a lot of time with them in the dressing room as first-team players, and just listening to them and looking how they engage and all that stuff. And then when they used to come up and watch, so like I think it was Sean used to come up and watch Alan, and then maybe Warren would come up and watch Sean and Alan when they were in, and then they got the buzz and they realised how much each of them enjoyed it. And the thing for me which really struck them is transitioning from being a pro player and coming in and working with other members of staff that are not pro footballers or from different disciplines, and working in a very heavy, demanding time program in terms of hours and everything else, and the commitment and sharing information and knowledge and accepting who everyone was for me a really vital ingredient for me at the time, to be comfortable enough to say, look, yeah, okay, and they've got the knowledge of the club, they've got the respect of the fan base, they've got the respect of the players because of how where they played and the level they played at. So it was a good fit, really. I think I used to get annoyed a little bit when people call it job for the boys, because I'd ask some people to come in and try and do that job. It's not 9 to 5, and the money, at the time, and even in some ways now, is not not great. And each one of them has moved on, from Alan to under 12s to under 18s to under 21s, from Sean under 14, say 13, wherever it might have been, to then 23s to first team, and Carl Fletcher going back as far as that, 18s with me, then 23s and out, and then back in loan manager. And I think to have that rich culture, and more importantly, those type of people in the building, is brilliant. I mean, I'm not going to dismiss Tommy and Andrew, because those two guys, since they've come in the building, have been exactly the same. I mean, obviously I know them as players, and you can look at Tommy on the pitch, and he was always very respectful for me, as Andrew was. And they come in the building, they've asked me for information and stuff, and they're not up themselves. Great guys, and that goes a long way for me. When I left recently, Tommy sent me a text saying, make sure you come into training, watch training, and everything. Was like, there's that level of respect that you don't forget. So yeah, I'll keep in contact, and great guys. And I think that what was resonated me is, and they've developed their coaching skills as well, and shared off each other, and gain insight from other coaches who haven't played the game. I think it's a really rich learning environment, and they've learned, and they're all progressing.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how Sean and Tommy progress with the first team.
And Drew's just come in recently. And he's been here for ages. He's great. He's been great with the younger players. Sorry.
No, that's fine. No worries. Just staying with the first team for a second, if we can. You've been caretaker manager on a couple of occasions. Firstly, alongside ex-goalkeeper coach Stuart Murdoch, and then when Paul Groves was sacked. Did you ever fancy moving away from the youth setup and taking the hot seat?
Do you know what? If I look back now, I would probably said yes. I would. I would have probably liked to take in the baton, if you like, and that's purely because I'm now the age I am, and I can't look back and look at what I might have achieved. I did quite well at non-league. I never finished outside of a top four. Got trophy semi-final, won promotion. One team I had the highest point score in the league. First time they've ever been promoted. It's still the record home score, 15-0 against a team. So I had a lot of success relatively at non-league. I had quite a lot of success in the military, coaching-wise and managing-wise. And then if I can say, although myself and Stuart, I think we had 7 games, I think it was, we only lost 1. All the rest were draws, or it might have been 6, lost 1, but all the rest were draws. So we didn't lose a lot of games, and we couldn't change anything. Frustrating thing was that we couldn't change things because it was week by week by week, and we were worried if we changed things, no one was going to come in the building, or was there going to be someone coming in the building? So it was only short term, and we couldn't really put a plan in. But Stuart was brilliant. Then I had the game against Bristol Rovers, I think, in the cup where we won, and that went down. So I had this thought about could I do it, but ultimately I had invested so much time, and I got so much support from Brocknor and what the players were going through. I felt it was my responsibility. Going back to the army, it was my responsibility and duty to follow through, because that time the plan hadn't been anywhere near where I needed it to be. And I thought, if I move away from it, what will happen? Because in football, and you're an avid football fan, if you look at some clubs, they can go from there to there in a season, in 2 seasons. And I had no desire to see the youth team go that way, because that can happen. So I relinquished that opportunity. But I look back now and go, what if? Mm-hmm. But I've had great memories with what I've done. But I would have liked to, but didn't.
Just staying on the subject of like changing manager when managers get sacked and leave clubs, how does that affect youth team players and academies? A different manager coming in.
Do you know what? It's, without being flippant, I haven't felt a concern for what is going to happen. Even in many ways, the sort of when we get relegated, we come out of the Premier League and we come to the Championship, and the support from the board at every point. I would like to think that I was quite demanding in many ways to what I wanted, and respected everyone for what they were doing. But I think I must have annoyed them to bits, trying to keep things in place and trying to raise the levels, and the budget we had was brilliant. But some clubs would worry about it. I think what kept us glued together was the personalities around the club. The ex-players that were involved, the longevity of the people that have been in place. What would we implode because of a relegation with all these people working together? And then what we were doing in the academy was for where we were as a Cat 3. We were producing players. We were getting, I think, was it last season? I think it was. Although the Premier League didn't jump on it, I think we had like 8 players in a squad for a Cat 3 club. So we were producing, we were punching above our weight. Without being flippant, I never felt, the concern. Without being, sort of bit sort of laid back about it. I thought it was never had those conversations. And we kept a philosophy and a style of play, and we bridged the gap with the 23s. So it would take quite a lot to then sort of, other than going Cat 4 or a B team or something like that. And obviously we've got where we've got now in the Cat 2. So I've never felt that worry personally.
Okay.
Had some hard conversations about reviewing the budget and can you trim this bit and trim that bit, and you do. Like any business, sometimes you have to cut your cloth.
Well, if we could just change the subject slightly again, if you can cast your mind back to the -17 season, working with a young Eddie and a young JT, what qualities could you see in them at that time of their career?
Lots really. The way the guys work together. I mean, obviously, that they played in the same side together. JT would be the one thing that struck me about Jace is that he would question. Which I didn't really think about that when he was playing, but he would question, like when he was with Jimmy Quinn, he'd question things. I thought he'd be take things the easy way wherever else, but. Going back to the point you make, I remember when Ed, Jace, and Steve Purchase and a few others did their coaching courses with me. They were very detailed, very committed. Didn't expect a given. They were thinking about the session, thinking about the preparation, thinking about the impact on the players, giving the feedback, which sounds straightforward, but a lot of people don't think about that in that much detail and the plan and preparation stuff. When I did the sessions, the way they interacted with the players and things, you think, you know what, you'd want to play for them, you'd want to work for them, and that's very important. That's important. And Ed would be very, very firm as well, very stern, which is great because he wouldn't let that fitted me. That's the way I would like to be working. Players knew where the level was and knew, and at the same time he'd be arm around you and, he'd stay and, work with the players after training, very meticulous. Jace was the same, and they were a great team together. Steve Purchase, is involved in that group as well, and they've got a great team that obviously they've moved on now to a different sphere, and you can see those traits and those sort of ingredients at that time, and the hunger to achieve and the willingness to analyze and work with players and develop players. And look, they were all due respect, they played at a level. And I think they knew how hard they had to work. And I think they knew that they had to get the players they were working with to work as hard as. And some of that was making sure that dressing room was on point. No shortcuts. The -17, I always remember it, some of the players that came into that team that were played in non-league, and they came in with a hunger. And that resonated around the changing room. And some of the more experienced players probably were thinking, well, I'm not going to let this lad get on top of me. I'm going to match what he's doing because he's doing it. And it just, it was like a ripple effect. So the whole environment changed. And, the little intricate things Ed did in terms of paying for stuff or bringing different aspects of things into the building has certainly stood him and the football clubs he's been involved with in good stead. I think he had a great learning experience at Burnley. I think, for all the right or wrong reasons, I think for him to leave us at the time he did, to go there and explore a different club, different culture, different players, different experiences, different results, different outcomes, different challenges, was probably exactly what he needed. To bring that back into the club, to go then where he went. Me and him had some head-to-heads about a number of things when he came into the academy. He was sort of saying about stuff and I was saying about stuff. We were at loggerheads with each other, but I respect that. And we keep in touch every week, basically, in some shape or form. To see where they are now, what they've done is unbelievable. But it's not unbelievable because it seems like it's not achievable. And I wouldn't want to say now, I knew he'd do it, but you knew he would be successful by what he does.
Yeah, definitely a future England manager, I hope. But would be interested to see if that does ever materialise. Can you explain, going back to the academy setup? Could you explain a bit about your last job role, head of player progression? Exactly what did that entail?
Okay, so there's a couple of things really. One, I wanted to provide an opportunity for who is now the academy manager, Sam Gisborne. So that was an opportunity then for him to move into that, because the academy manager's job is now more operational administration and that type of the sort of environment. It's not something that really excites me overly. And the other area was the need now for a better process for the older players, players coming in from 16 to 17, from 18 into the 21s, and for players that are going to get released at 18 or players getting released at 21s, and then trying to get a bit more of a joined up approach when the players are here, not when they get released, when they're here, and basically look at their progression, age group by age group, and the transition, and when they go on loan, that experience, having the time to have because it's such a busy environment. Sometimes we don't have the time to talk about stuff that may seem very relevant, because everyone expects them to turn up at training, train, work hard, clean the building up, and go home, and then the next day, and then do analysis. So the time to spend with individuals is not the great. So we had an opportunity to try and put that little program in place, and liaise with Carl Fletcher on the loan side, go and watch him on local loans if they're trained with the first team, speak to the coaches at the first team or the manager at the first team. And the thing for me is that sometimes young players, when they go over the first team, or a young player steps up an age group, they go like that, and then the coach goes, "Oh wow," but then they go back to their age group and they go like that. And for me, this is the gap that's there. So being a bit realistic about, okay, look, if they're that far away, probably the chances are limited. But if they're that far away from that level, then they've got a better chance. So what do we need to look at? And taking that information back and then presenting it and saying, right, okay, fine, and understanding a little bit more about the character. And the final bit of it, when they're getting released, is that discussion around prior to their knowledge about focusing back on the education, focusing on the what ifs, which we've always done, but they still will turn around and say, I want to be a professional football player. So it's a hard conversation to have. But then when you get through the release process, reality's there, and they still want to get into a professional club. And then that's still difficult, because there's other clubs who are releasing players exactly at the same time. There's other clubs who've got their own players in that they're thinking about releases, and their own clubs are bringing players. So it's such a difficult thing to navigate, and you can only understand what it's like for the player and the family. And the staff get affected by it to a degree, but it's more about the players. So it was more about having a joined up approach around that, and then monitoring those players, and then supporting those players for a period of time, which we did anyway. We always kept in touch with them. But, in the time I did the job, there was some of the players who said, thank you, shake your hand, I've had a fantastic time, I'm cracking on, which is great. And if in a year's time they want to know about something, a course, or can we access this, they hopefully will come back to us and we'll go, yeah, of course we can. So it's like it's a process for them to have, and some of them want it, some of them don't. Making sure that support network's there. So if they find it really difficult, we signpost them to Sport and Chance, which is a charity for sports people going through different types of problems, and we've got mechanisms in place to support them, because you don't want the situations that happened with that poor guy at Man City. So yeah, the player care side of it now is light years ahead of where it was, and that's purely by the finance attached by the league, Premier League, and the numbers of staff that are now around it to help those players through.
Okay, that's an interesting insight to that role. If we could touch on the category system for a second, how does a club's academy get audited, and what do the auditors do to determine what the club is doing right and what it needs to achieve the next level up?
Well, okay. There's two areas I would like to talk to, if you're okay.
Yeah.
One was the initial audit, which was in 2012. So I was fortunate. Well, I left here in 2011, which was unfortunate, and then I struggled to get a job. And then the Premier League engaged with a company called Double Pass, which is a Belgian company, and they were doing the audits in Belgium. They were doing handball in Finland. They were doing audits in Germany, I think, whatever. And they had this like star thing that they attached to it. And the Premier League had discussions with them, but they were an independent audit company. So I was fortunate enough to get employed with them. We put together the initial audit program, which was basically on an audit tool. It was like a tool, IT tool on a computer, and it was all criteria stuff. And it was basically to benchmark every club in the country, and then gauge whether they were a Cat 3, a Cat 4, well, it wasn't a Cat 4 to start with, a Cat 3, Cat 2, Cat 1, based on numbers of factors, facilities, finance, staffing levels. They were the three main things, and rules to a degree. So we had to go in, and then basically it was like ripping open the filing cabinets and pulling out the file, and it was really going right deep. A lot of clubs felt it really difficult, really challenging, but it was probably the best thing that happened to football clubs in the academy process. And I think a lot of it filtered into the senior side of the club because it had to be lined up. So we were into everything, you know, speaking to the manager, the technical director, all the coaches, all the sports scientists, all the educationalists, the part-time coaches, watching training, watching games. And then we were putting information into the audit tool, and then it would give you a score, and that would be the category. So that categorized them back in 2012. A lot of clubs complained about the bureaucracy around it because they felt it was invasive, too much documentation, which I would agree. And now the Premier League have relinquished the contract with Double Pass, and the Premier League do the audit now. And the audit now is apparently a little bit bureaucratic, but they still want us to upload loads of documents. And it's based on compliance, and which are the rules, and then the standards that are set. And then some safeguarding type, safe to operate. So I use safe to operate, you know, recruiting staff, safeguarding stuff, and everything else. So it's 3 areas, and then you get graded on where you fit in terms of, you know, sort of levels of achievement in your category. And then you get a report, and then you've got to then do the action plan on the report, meet the action plan, outcomes, get over them, or you get reassessed. Some clubs now, because previously no one really got moved out of anything, some clubs have lost their category. So, for example, Reading were a Cat 1. They basically had their license suspended, and then they've just got Cat 1 again. So there is now some actions being taken on clubs who don't sort of do the particular requirements that are, or breach rules, for example. So it's monitored very well. And I think, if I'm honest, I think the EPPP, the initial audit, has probably taken the whole academy process and some of the England younger teams to a different level because of the numbers of staff, the quality facilities, and the finances attached to it, and the experiences that these young players get now in the Cat 1, Cat 2 teams.
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting. I mean, I've never had an idea really on how the system worked and how things got audited, but that's a really good insight.
But basically, qualitative and quantitative analysis was the first one. Even the budgets, you know, we had all the budgets and how do you spend it, where do you, and it was like you uncovered a lot of stuff. And I think it was for the first time, for probably ever, that clubs were accountable.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to learn on how all that side works.
2.5 years, I had a great time.
Yeah, that's great insight there. I don't know how much of this question you'll be able to answer, or if any at all, but how do technical director Richard Hughes and his assistant Simon Francis interact with your role and the academies?
So I when I moved roles, you know, Richard and Simon were the people that I liaise with, and we would, in terms of the audit process, there was also a requirement to hold technical board meetings. So obviously, Richard and Simon hold sort of technical director roles as well. So we would convene those meetings where, you know, Ed would be in there, Richard would be in there, I would be in there, Jason would be in there, Neil Blake would be in there. And then we talk about specific academy stuff, first team stuff, and anything else. And then Simon's come on board, and then my role changed. So we talk about the loan players, the progression of players that we have in the building. So in those particular meetings, the coaches at those age groups, 18s and 23s, would come together. We'd have pre-meetings and talk through about the players, where they are, what level they're at, also what players we might be releasing, also what players might be on the radar. And then we talk about that process for those players to either progress through the pathway into the next age group, or actually, having to be released, or what ones we would target for loan clubs in liaison with, obviously, Carl Fletcher. And then I would have incidental meetings about certain situations, the Cat 2 thing, for example, where we were going. And so that's sort of the way, in a very short synopsis of the way it worked.
Okay. So just touching on Carl Fletcher there as his loan manager role, how important is that role within the academy setup?
It's key, if I'm honest. If you speak to players now, historically, about their journey, and they talk about the loan, they will probably, no player wants to go on loan, I don't think, because they see themselves being detached from the first team and out of sight, out of mind. So I think monitoring it and keeping on top of it is vital. If the players do go on loan, knowing that someone's going to be following things up, having conversations with the clubs that they're at or they're going to, is it the right fit for that player? The style they play, are they getting the right information? Do we get the right information back in terms of, what level of sports science access that they've got? What their running stats are? Are they going to come back into the first team, or, the 23s at the same level of fitness? If that level isn't right, the impact on it. And then, the conversations around how the player navigates that loan process and how they interact with those players is an important communication tool for us to use. Where we didn't have it, it was a little bit shotgun, ad hoc. And Carl's devoted his time to getting out to see as many players as he can. And I was helping him on a local basis, going out to the local loans, Plural Towns or Weymouths or Wimbornes and that, and making sure I kept an eye on the players here. And then we write reports back about the players' performance, and again, speaking to the coach or the manager. So we had an insight into what the players' behaviour was like away from us, which I think is important. And did the players interact with the players at other team? It's interesting. I spoke to a couple of players in the job we were talking about before, and I said to them, how do you enjoy the loan? Oh, I didn't particularly like it. And unfortunately, some players will make every excuse up about why the loan didn't go well, and maybe not look in the mirror and look at themselves. And they've got to be realistic about that side of things as well. But also, I spoke to a couple of players, and I said, well, who did you, how did you get on with the players and all that? I didn't really speak to them. I went, what do you mean you didn't speak to them? I said, you're playing with these guys and you're in the dressing room with them. Do you not sort of have conversations about, what you think you do well, or no, not really? I said, but, you're going in from say you're 19, you're going into a men's dressing room, and the one thing they're going to be looking at is you're an academy player, is whether you're up yourself, because, you think you're a bit of a, big timer. So you've got to, and these are sometimes, in a majority of those age groups, they're non-league teams. You have to go in there and fit in, because what will happen is, quite rightly, the players will disengage with them, because the player you're playing alongside could be the manager's best mate. It could be the coach's best mate. So those conversations have got to be, strong conversations about, and it be accepted. So there's a lot of education around the loan that the players don't quite understand. And I think Carl, having had the journey he's had in his career, and he's done the job well, and he doesn't suffer fools at all. I think it's a vital, pivotal part of the job, the academy, and the join up between the first team and the academy.
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting insight on how that works. People may think that academies is all about training, matches, fitness, but it's obviously a lot more than that. How does the whole project work for an academy player?
How does it work? Well, it's quite a rigorous schedule. There's a huge amount of commitment from the families. If you're talking about academy players from 9 all the way through to 18, 16, the schedule's 4 nights a week. It's a Sunday, Saturday games, 2-hour sessions. The players at certain age groups live an hour and a half away. So that in itself is like a 3-hour consideration, at the front of training, at the back of training, on top of 2 hours training. So there's 5 hours in totality out there life. It's a big commitment. And obviously the access to what they've got when they come in, the expectations of when they come in. is sort of pretty key. They're being watched from as soon as they get out the car, how they interact with people, how they approach people. Obviously how they approach training is important as well. There's a lot of feedback. There's a lot of data that we fill in around the players' performance. We put it into what they call PMA, which is a performance management application. It's like an online tool where all the players' details, what sessions they've done, what type of sessions they'll run. So there's a lot of detail around the player there. There's obviously the sports science, trainer side of things, and a lot of workshops that we put on, informal education programs, as we call it. So we've got player liaison staff, welfare staff, head of education, player care. So education has always been, and I hope it continues to be, a key part of what we do, because the Brocknor thing from 2001 is a key part of what we've done and why we've got here. And people need to be aware, or staff need to be aware, that not a lot of these players will progress where they'd like to go, but they've got to progress in life and a career. So the education's foremost, the informal education. They get workshops coming in, doing sex education, online stuff, safeguarding, EDI stuff, equality, diversity, inclusive type workshops, ex-players coming in talking about the perils of things, gambling. So there's a large amount of workshops that are provided to support the players' knowledge and understanding. Social media one's really good. We get the guy coming in who works with first team players, and he pulls up one of the players' social media from 3 years ago and says, you said this 3 years ago. Look at the effect of that could have on this being done. Or he talks about players who are unknown about this situation where it went on. So, teaching about, social media, and if you do become an established player, how things, so lots of education around that. And then we keep a lot of interaction and communication with the schools. The education department work tirelessly. I'm saying, not saying that because my wife's head of education, but one of the reasons she came in is she was a tutor at Brocknor College, and she's been in with us now for 16 years on and off, and she's a football coach, so she understands it, the interaction and the desire for us to support the education program. She took a pay cut as well, by the way, when she left Brocknor College. It's foremost of what we're doing, because at the end of the day, we're educating players in football. We need to educate them in life, and we then educate, hopefully, the good people who become good footballers, and they'll continue to play football if they wish. And even if it's non-league, they take that into that environment and they educate people in that environment about things. So I'm hopeful that an under-18 player, if they see an under-14 player doing something out of sync, the under-18 player would, give them a little bit of insight, and making sure that all the staff, no matter whether you're part-time or intern or that, take responsibility for educating the players. So I'd like to think it's a really rich environment. We do the workshops with the players and the parents. We do inductions at the beginning of the season. We do we do reviews with the players, sort of 4 times a year, a couple of times with the parents, a lot of times with the players, loads of analysis stuff. We do tours when we're available to do it. We vary the games program. Sometimes we'll play some Cat 1 teams. So we're trying to be, trying to provide an environment which caters for the needs of the person in this environment and beyond, I'd like to think.
Okay. Staying with the academy, you introduced life stories into the academy, which I believe Eddie Howe has also implemented at Newcastle. What does this consist of exactly?
Okay, so it's been in place, I think, now 5 seasons. So we got to a point where we were growing as an academy. We were bringing more staff in. Like I said, we had an age group coach at the schoolboy program. Every age group was a full-time coach. We'd gone from, Joe Roach in 2001, the only full-time member of staff, to 5 years ago, 2018, with 29 full-time staff, and we were bringing work placements in, and I felt we were looking for jobs that were available, sending application forms out, or the advert for the post, getting the CVs in, selecting the CVs based on the knowledge, experience for the role, bringing someone in, interviewing Matt Harrison. Interview did really well. Great, give him the job. Comes in, does the job, and you think, wow, great decision. And you know what you got. And then, but other times it doesn't work quite that way. And because the volume of, I'm thinking, I don't actually know enough. I'm telling people that we need to know more about the players, but I actually don't know enough about the staff. So I put it to the sort of the hierarchy of the academy. I said, look, I want to do life stories. And so what's that? I said, basically, life story. We'll talk about anything you want, where you were brought up, your life, what you did at school, education, sport, interest, whatever. And Alan Connell, he said, oh, do you have to? I went, yeah. He said, can we just make it 15 minutes then? I went, well, you make it as long as you want. So, but you're doing it on a PowerPoint. So we keep it and store it. And he went, oh, okay. Anyway, I did my one first. And because I was 60, whatever it was then, 63, I thought I've got a lot of information. So I just did my bullet pointers. And it was like, bop, 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 bop. I thought, I don't want to stand on a soapbox talking about Joe Roach doing this and the other. I'll bore them. And then Alan did his next. And he wanted 15 minutes. 45 minutes later, he's still talking. But it was brilliant because he talked about stuff that I'd forgotten about, but no one else knew it anyway, because they wouldn't have known. Some of them wouldn't have even known him as a player because they'd come in to do, I don't know, a sports science job or something like that. And obviously he's a bit of a legend to the club, being through the period he went through. So, and then another member of staff did it, and he opened up about a family thing, and he broke down, and it created this attachment, this empathy between the staff and this person. And someone else talked about one of the girls we had in was brilliant medical. She'd been to Australia doing Australia rules rugby or something. I'm giving it, working for them, and I didn't even know that. So she was talking about that sport, and then someone else talked about Formula One, and another member of staff went, I love that, but no, they didn't know. Each of them didn't know, so they're talking about that. So anyway, it went on and did that, and then as I've seen it grow, and I thought it's probably one of the best things I've ever done to get insight into people and understand them more. And then I decided, when I handed over the role, I thought I'm going to do mine again. And mine went from bullet pointed 2 pages of whatever it was to 94 slides. And I basically, obviously 94 slides is a lot on a PowerPoint, but some of them were just snapshots, bang, 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 bang. But I explained about where I was born, a little bit like this, where I was born, leaving home, my mum's situation, lose my daughter at 28, and the difficulties of that, and have a connection with them, because I think it's important that people know that you've got to sometimes open up and be raw. And someone has a bereavement within the staff, and I tell you, oh, I understand what you're talking about, and they go, no, you don't. Well, now they know I do. And I think having that empathy is important. And and I talked about the coaching and the journey, the football journey, and being in the army, and about exposure to sport. I went to Japan and did judo. Never done judo in my life. It's just like, if you truly are focused and you work hard and committed, anything's possible, as they say. And then I shared it with the youth team players, the 21s, to sort of give them a sense of like, you've got the ability you have is inside you here. It's in here, and a lot of it's in here. If you can apply yourself in any way like this, I never knew at 16, 17, 22, I would achieve what I achieved. And yes, I've achieved it in small measures, and I would never have known it, but I now know the potential I had, but I didn't know. And if we want them to progress as a footballer, so I presented to them, and it was brilliant, and it's still carrying on now. And I think Ed and Steve and that were aware of it, because obviously Al did his, and they talk a lot. And I think Ed took a little snapshot of it, or a few snapshots of it. And I think a couple of the players, when he went into Newcastle, talked about how good it was at inquiring about how they were in the family, and a little bit more insight. And I think it's just a brilliant thing to utilise. And I think anyone who's working in an environment that needs to know, or truly wants to get to know, the individuals that work with them and for them, I think it's a great way to break down some barriers and get to know people more. Because the subtleties around, someone saying to me about someone's parent or whoever's ill or has passed away, they know I know, and I can go and have a conversation. And it's just, and even with someone who's with the one of the players, he was aware of it, and I spoke to him about a few things, and it just broke down some barriers, and it actually it allowed them to open up a lot more to me, because how raw it was for me, the situations I've had, and I was a single parent for 3 years, so I had kids by myself for a period of time. So, there's a lot of things that have made me more resilient and robust. And I think to encapsulate all, that's why I was determined to provide a vehicle for young players to progress in whatever it was, because I'd seen all the bumps in the road, and I wanted them to take advantage of the opportunity they had from the education, from the program, from the interactions, and the fact that they will gain long-term relationships with these players. Some of the players in the youth team in 2003 will still be in contact with players now, this far and from 20 years away. So it's all that stuff. So it sounds like a bit of a thing story, but I think that's why I've wanted to be so commitment, because there's been lots of things that have gone on that have made me, going back to the point you made, have taken and have made me who I am. And my family have been brilliant support of me in lots of times, and that's important as well. Respecting the people who you love.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like such a powerful tool. Something so simple, but at the same time so powerful.
Yeah.
I've got to say, this has been such a great insight, Joe. I mean, to learn all about the academy at the club and you as a person, it's been absolutely wonderful to sit here tonight and chat to you. But one last question: what does the future hold for Joe Roach?
Well, great question. I'm 67. Age is a number, as they say. I've still got a lot to offer. I'd like to try and add value to something. I'm not. I don't stand the soapbox. I don't think I've got an ego. I just want to try and help. I've spoken to a couple of organisations that are, are sort of grassroots based, to try and help in some way. I've spoken to Steve Butler about the Uganda Cherries thing. I want to try and help. I just want to be active, and try and sort of support people in their endeavours about progression, and support people who are trying to help and support young players or young people. I'm going to Dorchester tomorrow. I've got a charity, Bournemouth Youth Cancer Trust, which is a really small charity. I spoke to them. I'm going to meet them down. They've had to move offices from Poole. I'm going to meet them tomorrow down in Dorchester. They have a place they rent. I want to go and sort of try and help them if I can. And the close to my heart in a way, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, because when my daughter passed, she was 28, and I didn't know any of these types of organisations that existed. No one gave me any information. There was nothing from the NHS. She had a brain tumour, and this charity looks after players at the same age range as Youth Cancer Trust, so 16 up to wherever else. They come down and spend some time away from the family, and I want to go down there, and they're not down there now. They only come down periodically. I want to go down there, speak to the organisers, and try and sort of offer some support, even if it's driving the minibus for them. I just want to keep sort of engaged and active with people, because I'm a people person. And yeah, if I can do some coaching or managing something that it still be something that excites me, because I think I've got a lot to give in the coaching field, and even if it's helping mentoring somebody, and maybe going around and talking about the life story, going around to clubs if they would have me, and talking to the players at 17 to 18, 20 about this type of environment. Because I don't think many people that we have in, talking about the workshops we had before, not many people. I don't think we've had anybody in who's been an academy manager, head of coaching, a youth team manager, reserve team manager, caretaker manager, assistant manager, head of play aggression, who's done this type of role and understands it for as long as I have. So I've got something to offer to try and give to clubs, the staff at the clubs, and those players a little bit of insight to help them. Look, like I said before, you only need to inspire one person, and I only need to help one person, and my job's done.
Well, that's a fantastic answer there to finish off with, Joe. Yeah, thank you for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute privilege to sit here and chat and learn about you, and learn about the academy system at the club. And I wish you all the best.
Matt, I am really humbled and I'm privileged, and I really appreciate the opportunity for me to come and talk about some things that hopefully if any young players ever watch this, or else hopefully inspires them to focus on the ability they've got. And it's been great me having the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm really pleased you asked me. Thank you.
That's really great. Cheers. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed that as much as I have. It's been a great insight learning about Joe as a person, obviously through his military background and how he's transitioned into club football and came to Bournemouth and has obviously helped develop the club in many ways, even being involved with the first team. But it's been great to get a real insight into how the youth system, the old school of excellence youth system, and now the academy works. It was a real privilege to sit down with Joe tonight, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Stick around to the channel. Obviously, we've got our weekly podcast, Cherry Picking, where we discuss things all AFC Bournemouth. And of course, we'll have more of these evenings with coming up very soon. So stick to the channel. Until next time, up the cherries.